Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to welcome everyone who's come in person to the Advent Lutheran Church in New York City, and also to the viewers wherever you are, in your homes, in your community centers, at schools, who are watching this live. But I'm very pleased right now to introduce someone who is a writer, a social activist, and is the senior minister at Judson Memorial Church in the Village in New York. She's also an award winner of an ACLU Courage Award. Her name is Donna Shaper, and she is well known among the struggles for social justice and truth and all the things that I think everyone here feels very strongly about. And I just want to say one thing really briefly. The former minister at Judson, Howard Moody, started the Clergy Consultation Committee, which helped women get safe abortions from good doctors that the clergy themselves checked out. So Donna has committed this social justice activism of the church, and she recently wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times about her own abortion. I'm pleased to welcome Donna Shaper.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I did write about my own abortion, and I wrote it proudly and gladly, because in my heart, I know it was right. I know it was good. And the idea that anybody would ever be shamed for having had an abortion drives me religiously and spiritually nuts. So, would you pray with me? And if you're not the praying kind, don't worry, I'm not going to bother you. Be tolerant of me. Oh God, you whom some call Yahweh and others call Jesus and others call Allah, you whom some only know as spirit or force, you whom some know as Jesus the Christ, you who are beyond any word that any human being could ever use to capture you, you who guarantee freedom and the joy of men and women and people of all kinds. Draw near now and bless this gathering, that it may be one more time when we say out loud how much we love each other, how much we love life, and how much we love choice. Amen. Amen.
We'd like to introduce ourselves as the co-chairs of this gathering tonight. This is Riley Ruiz. Riley is a member of the New York City Revolution Club, a leader in the movement to end pornography and patriarchy, and a veteran of the Abortion Rights Freedom Ride last summer, which traveled to 15 states, including stops in all 5 states that have only one remaining abortion clinic.
Thank you, Mary Lou. And this is Mary Lou Greenberg. Mary Lou was a longtime revolutionary with deep roots in the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s. She played a key role in developing the first clinic defense, leading others all over the country to stand up and defend clinics and providers when they were under vicious assault in the 90s. And she continues this work today.
Thank you, Riley. Now we're going to, right now, a video message from an absolutely wonderful poet and writer and activist, Marge Piercy. She made this video especially for this event here this evening.
My name is Marge Piercy. I'm a writer, poet, novelist, memoirs, etc., etc., etc. Feminist, political activist, lefty. When I was 18, I got pregnant by my first boyfriend in college. And I could not find any way to get an abortion as a working class girl in Detroit. There was no available way, so I had to do it myself. And I almost killed myself. I almost bled to death. So I decided that was never going to happen to anyone that I could do anything about. So for years, I kept a file of abortionists. Whenever I heard of a good one, I helped women get abortions. I held them while they bled afterwards when the doctor who did it wouldn't help them. All the way up until the time that abortions became illegal to the degree they're illegal. After Roe v. Wade, I was very active. We took to the streets, and the high school students took to the streets in New York. It wasn't the Supreme Court that changed things. They yielded to enormous pressure. We were in the streets. We were busing up to Albany and pressuring the legislature and pestering them half to death about it. And there was one demonstration after another. I'm a fairly good rabble-rousing speaker, so I spoke at a number of those. And it just finally, it became more legal. And then, of course, it's been rolled back and rolled back and rolled back. And then on the Cape, as things were getting bad again, we started a group called Roots of Choice, and we did escorts for women going into abortions and also taking them to pharmacies afterwards and getting groceries if they needed to get groceries, etc. And I became fairly close to some of the women working in the clinic and wrote a poem about them that they liked a lot, about what it's like to work in a clinic. And we took people into Boston. In one case, we got a woman there just as her ectopic pregnancy, which the doctor hadn't recognized, which I actually diagnosed just as it was about to burst, and she just went straight into the operating room. So we did that for a number of years till people sort of burned out. It's still a very important issue to me. I lost my best friend when I was 24 to a botched abortion. She bled to death. It was covered up. Usually those kind of deaths were then covered up. Also, and it wasn't just women who were seeking abortions. I had a friend who desperately wanted a child, and she was pregnant and she lost the child. But when you lost a child, you were treated like a criminal, and so she lay in the corridor in the hospital, and they wouldn't give her anything, and they wouldn't do anything. They treated her like a criminal. It was just agony for her. It was hell in those days. I gave a speech for Planned Parenthood in Ann Arbor one time about what life was really like, talking to the students who come to that. It was a time when falling in love could kill you. It was a time in which getting pregnant could ruin your life, because you'd be kicked out of school. You might be thrown out of your home. I had friends who were just thrown out by their parents because they got pregnant. It made your life a living hell if it didn't kill you. I've had women say to me, "Oh, my doctor would always do it." Well, your doctor wouldn't always do it because he didn't want to go to jail. The guys who did it right were heroes. But they were supported by always a corrupt administration, and usually some form of what was called the syndicate or the mafia or whatever you call them. They were allowed to exist illegally. And it added to the corruption in the place. But they were still heroes because they were willing to do it.
We have a special message from David Gunn Jr., who is the son of Dr. David Gunn, who was the first abortion doctor murdered by an anti-abortion fanatic.
21 years ago, in 1993, my dad was murdered outside of an abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida, on his way to work. He had just gotten out of his car. He was walking into the back door. He had polio, so he walked with a limp and walked rather slowly, used a cane most of the time. as he was about to enter the clinic, an anti-abortion protester named Michael Griffin stepped from behind a bush and shot him in the back 3 times. Since that time, I became active in fighting for abortion rights because I felt that the rhetoric of the anti-abortion side had escalated to the point where doctors were being dehumanized, where their stalking, their assassinations were not only condoned but encouraged. If you have any doubt about that, all you need to do is Google Paul Hill and his Defensive Action Network. Check out Neil Horsley and the evidence upon evidence of these radical Christian fundamentalists who believe that doctors who perform abortions, people who advocate for abortion, and clinic staff and owners, not only should they be outlawed, but they should be killed. My first visit to an abortion clinic was when I was 14 years old. I went with my dad to work. He drove about 60 to 70 miles one way to 5 different clinics across the southeast. He worked in Columbus, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, and in Pensacola, Florida. He traveled that circuit weekly, and from a very young age understood the reality of what abortion services means to women of all ages and of all races. 1 in 3 women in the United States has an abortion. I can say from my personal experience that there are very few women I know who have not had an abortion. So I support the action that we're taking this weekend. I support it for my dad. I support it for the women that I know. And I support it for the women who need the service now and are denied access. This isn't a Southern thing. It's not a Midwestern thing. It's a national thing. And it is time that we all stand up and say that we're not going to abide our rights being taken away from us any longer.
So thank you to David Gunn Jr. for sending that incredibly powerful statement to this event tonight. So we wanted to say thank you to a lot of people. But first off, thank you to the Advent Lutheran Church for being so supportive of this action, providing us with the space. Thank you to Tom. Thank you to Tom and everybody who was involved with pulling this webcast together. And welcome everybody who's here in the house tonight and everyone tuned into the webcast. Tonight we are all a part of something that is setting out to truly change the situation we are in today regarding abortion rights.
Now, everyone here and everyone who's watching, wherever they are, will be taking a tremendous journey tonight. It will take us all back to the days before Roe, the Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion in the U.S. It will take us through today with examples of determined resistance and heroism. And then it will direct our eyes forward to a vision and way out of this. So we would like now to take a journey back. And with the actors who are reading the first-person statements from women who had and who saw their friends have illegal abortions, could the actors please come up?
My friend Maria. I grew up in Southern California during the late 60s. Abortion was something that nice girls didn't talk about. There were code words for abortion, like taking care of the problem, going to see a relative, taking a bus to Tijuana. But we knew exactly what that meant. We believed that abortion would scar you for life and you might as well be wearing a scarlet letter, and you would be known as one of those girls. If you got pregnant, you had only two choices. Either be sent away to have the baby and give it up for adoption, or find someone with connections in Tijuana, Mexico. The shame and guilt with either choice and the fear of dying from an illegal abortion was the price you paid for being young and foolish. I had a good friend. I will call her Maria. She was fun, funny, very smart, popular, and came from a loving but strict family. Her father taught math, and her mother worked at home caring for Maria's two younger brothers. Maria was not supposed to date. None of us were. But that did not stop her from experimenting with hand-holding, spin the bottle, and 7 minutes in heaven. I am really dating my age here. During the fall of our first year in high school, Maria became very anxious and distracted. She would not tell us what was going on, but she was not the same carefree, happy young woman. I don't think she ever came out and told us she had gotten pregnant, but she did tell us that she had done something very stupid, and she was so afraid of what her parents would do. I think she was more afraid of disappointing them than anything else. To this day, I believe that she was raped, and she was ashamed and thought she was somehow responsible for an assault. A few weeks later, Maria missed 2 days of school. We were afraid to call her house because we didn't want her to get in trouble. We hoped she had found a sympathetic doctor who would do the D&C for cramps, and no one would be the wiser. What would we say to her parents? They could never find out that she went to Mexico for an abortion. I still remember saying that if her parents found out, it would kill them. I did not realize how pathetic those words would become. The public reason Maria never came back to school was that her appendix burst and she died before they could operate. We knew that was not true. The silence was so painful for those of us who knew her, who knew what really happened. My wonderful friend bled to death, alone, in a parking lot on the U.S. side of the border. I never saw Maria again. Never heard her voice, her laughter, her quiet way of making you feel important, her spiking the ball during the intramural volleyball, making ridiculous faces when the gym teacher wasn't looking, never going to shop for spring formal or prom, never again buying that crazy shade of pink bubblegum lipstick, and promising that we would never ever wear those hideous things called pantyhose. I have 2 daughters and a granddaughter. I have to believe that Maria's parents would have gladly exchanged their pride and good name for just 1 more minute with their beloved daughter. Too many families have lost a daughter, mother, sister, grandmother, aunt, friend because of an illegal abortion. Too many women experience sepsis from dirty instruments, infertility due to infection, and horrendous injuries from self-induced abortions by coat hanger or knitting needle. This is a barbaric and immoral, and we must not allow it to happen ever again.
Hello, my name is Veronica Day. I'll be reading September 1959. It was September 1959. There I was, 20 years old, and my period hadn't come. I was living at home, working and going to school. Who could I turn to? The college sperm donor disappeared as soon as he found out I was pregnant. My life was ruined. My parents would kill me. There were no clinics, and the family doctor would call my parents. Terror. Cold, white terror. I whispered my situation to the older woman at the office where I worked, and she said she knew a doctor who could give me a shot to start my period. Another week passed, and yes, there was blood. But a month later, my period didn't come, and now I'm over 2 months pregnant. When I went to the doctor again, he said he could not give me a legal abortion unless I was bleeding or had verification from 2 psychologists that I would do something to harm myself if I had to carry it to term. I had already used up my savings with the previous visits, so the psychologist route was impossible. In a panic, I went back to my friend. She knew of another method. She brought me a catheter, a long, narrow, hollow rubber tube with a hole near the tip used to drain urine when a person is unconscious. She said, straighten the coat hanger and put it inside the catheter to the tip. Put cotton in the hole near the tip and add iodine to prevent infection. Then she said I should put it in my cervix. Well, I didn't know my cervix from a kidney, so she explained that I had to put my finger inside down there. No one used the word vagina. And you feel a soft donut-shaped organ. Put the catheter inside the hole in the donut and leave it there as long as you can. My mom was working, so I called in sick. No one was home, and I followed her instructions. It took a while and some contortions, but I was able to insert this coat hanger covered catheter into my cervix. I left it in about 8 hours, and when I took it out, there was some blood. So I know I have blood, and I went to the doctor with some hope. He said I didn't have enough blood and refused to do an abortion. By that time, I was praying that I had cancer and would die from this terrible thing that would be found out by my family, my friends, and everyone. I contemplated suicide to avoid the humiliation. I had broken off with my high school fiance earlier that year and began to think that a woman from a blue-collar family could do something with her life besides become a mother. Didn't know what, but I had hopes and dreams, vague, but knew I didn't want to be trapped by pregnancy. My friend found a back alley doctor who did legal abortions and set up an appointment for me the next week. By now, I had maybe been over 3 months. I tried to get loans from family and banks, but in those days, women had to have their father or husband sign for a loan, so they said no. And a legal abortion cost 5 times my weekly income. The night after I canceled the appointment, I woke hemorrhaging and ran to the bathroom, leaving puddles of blood in the carpet. I woke my parents, and the warm family scene ensued while we waited for the ambulance. Dad cried, Mom yelled. My 18-year-old sister came out of her room wanting to know what was up. My dad told her to go back into her room, and my mom said, no, you stay so you can learn and don't get yourself in a situation like this. I kept bleeding all over the towels. The next day I woke in the hospital, all cleaned out, no infection, and not a word from my parents from that day on. But I was one of the lucky ones.
This is my first abortion lesson. It was the year of my liberation, 1973. We were the graduating class. I was now old enough to vote. I could take to the streets, burn my bra, and thanks to Roe v. Wade, I could have a legal abortion. But like all good stories, this one starts years before, and the lessons continue today. In 1968, I entered a new school, and the judgment started right away. They were rich. I was poor. Their dads were heart surgeons and judges and professors, and my dad was often unemployed. They lived in mansions by the lakes. I lived in a dumpy lower duplex in a rundown, broken neighborhood. Their moms volunteered at school. My mom cried a lot. I knew right away that this wasn't going to go well. My first awareness of abortion occurred when I overheard the rich girls talking. Somebody was pregnant, someone's sister, I think. Her parents were flying over to Mexico. Mom was going with, it would be simple. Sister would return and pick up life, just where she left off. Everyone knew you could just go to Mexico. No problem. Another girl shared a similar story. A neighbor or a family friend or something. She just went to Mexico. Wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal to my friend who got pregnant at age 15, 4 years before Roe v. Wade. She didn't live by the lakes. She lived in a garage that someone had converted almost into a place that was still unfit for a family before she was pregnant, and nobody was happy. We weren't especially close, but I tried to help. I told her about Mexico and how it would be all right if she just went to Mexico. Of course, that was out of the question. An abortion costs money, and nobody in that family had the money to get to the airport, much less another country. Nobody had any idea how to find or pay abortion doctors. She dropped out of school at 15 and had a baby. I lost track of her, but I knew that her life was over. Her options at 15 were now narrowed to only one: be a mother, even though she was still a child herself. Fast forward a few years. Women and teens were in the streets fighting for women's right to an abortion, right to equality in the workplace, equality everywhere. I knew some of the older women holding signs and screaming for those basic freedoms, and I liked their messages, and I tried to follow their lead. I certainly believed in abortion. On the other side of the street, I saw my former classmates from that rich school, the ones who talked about how easy it was to fly to Mexico, get your abortion, come back, your life unchanged. Now they were against abortion. Now they said abortion was dirty. It was the birth control of the poor. It was killing your baby. People got abortions because they didn't know how to control their bodies. This is the lesson that I learned that day. Rich people get what they want, even if it's illegal. Then when it is legal, they judge anyone who wants or gets it, whatever it is. I still suffered from insecurities and peer pressure. I couldn't confront them. I couldn't or didn't say anything to challenge them. I remember that day. I remember the street corner, and I remember my silence. Rather than speak, I internalized their judgment. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't do what was right. I was shocked by their hypocrisy, but I couldn't articulate my outrage. I'd like to say that it's better for women today, but it's not. I've walked on college campuses talking to students and young people about abortion. Even though it's legal, they can't afford it. They can't drive 300 miles to the nearest abortion clinic. They might as well be trying to get to Mexico in 1968. It just isn't an option. Many either try to self-induce an abortion or they drop out of their lives and become mothers. For 40 years, I've watched this debate ebb and flow. We're now in such a perilous position. Women will die without safe and legal abortion. I know this in my soul. People of privilege will still get abortions, and poor people will have their lives foreclosed. Not every abortion story is about the act of abortion. My story is about the realization that we are not all living in the same world. There will always be abortion, but it won't be accessible to everyone. If this country reverses Roe v. Wade, if women are stripped of this basic freedom, it will not end abortion. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It will criminalize and stigmatize and isolate them. To deny women this choice will be to further polarize this world and create further inequality among people.
Hello, I'm Ava Lee Scott, and I'm reading Sent Away Girl. I was 17 years old and just about to graduate from high school when I missed my period. It is hard to describe the terror that struck when realizing that maybe, likely, I was pregnant. Here I was, just about to enter a new phase of life, go to college in the fall, with excitement and anticipation. And then this dark cloud took over my life. I couldn't believe it. Hadn't we used a condom? I mean, the only birth control available in those days. I mean, I was in love with my boyfriend, but neither of us was ready to get pregnant. In those days, one of the main ways that people in our situation dealt with a pregnancy was to get married, and get married in a hurry. That gave the so-called legitimacy to the child and the woman. We were young, and not ready for that kind of commitment. In no way we were ready to be responsible parents. I desperately wanted to get an abortion, but it was not legal, and we had no idea where to turn or where to get a legal abortion. I didn't want to tell my parents. They would be so disappointed in me and so upset with me. And so we looked to anyone who might know how to end this pregnancy. I tried different home remedies that were suggested by people who seemed to know. None of them worked. I was not willing to endanger myself by putting a sharp object up my vagina to open my uterus and abort the fetus. So finally, after waiting until I was 4 months pregnant, I broke down and I told my parents. Luckily, my parents were very upset and disappointed, but they stuck by me. We decided that the best thing for me was to go to a home for unwed mothers, where I lived with other young women in my situation until I gave birth. I had to give the child up to an adoption agency. It was a very cruel thing to have this child that I did not want, but yet felt some responsibility for what would happen to him or her once they were born. And a separate human being, someone who then had their own life to live. There was a great deal of social stigma and judgment heaped on girls like me, and I bore the shame and secrecy, not wanting anyone to know that I had gotten knocked up, as the expression was back then. And again today in popular culture, this was no wonderful Juno experience. Who were the young women I lived with in that home for unwed mothers? Mainly, they were girls just like me. Some quite a little bit younger, and some a bit older, who had gotten pregnant and, for whatever reason, had decided they would not keep the child, but they would give birth to it. I remember one 12-year-old girl who still played with dolls. She likely became pregnant through incest or rape. There was one young woman who was mentally challenged and who didn't really know how she had gotten pregnant. There were Native American girls who came from boarding schools that Native Americans were sent to, and some young women who had snuck away without telling their parents. They were in fear of being kicked out of their families. None of us wanted this situation. Many were abandoned by their partner, and all of us had to live the rest of our lives knowing that we didn't know what happened to the child that we gave birth to, and then gave up. I do not have any regrets about my decision, given the choices that were available to me at that time. But I think it was very wrong and harmful that I did not have the option to have an abortion. It was very wrong and harmful that birth control was not available to me. It It was very wrong and harmful that I was made to feel that I had done something wrong by having sex with my boyfriend. It was very wrong and harmful that my choice was to have a child I did not want, nor believe I could care for, or to carry it to term and give it up for an adoption. And it was especially wrong and harmful that so many young women of my and previous generations who found themselves in similar situations found the only solution was to risk harming themselves and their very lives. Years later, after Roe v. Wade, after I had the number of children I chose and wanted to have, I became pregnant again and was able to immediately get a safe abortion. I had absolutely no hesitation about that, and it was a simple and easy procedure. This is how it should be. Any woman should be able to make that decision and have access to trained medical professionals who can do that procedure. We cannot go back to those horrible days when women did not have this right.
I remember those days. I think all of us of a certain age remember those days. And I also remember when all that began to change. When people rose up, and how really liberating that was, how daring. And part of a whole larger liberating upsurge at the time. The Black liberation struggle, anti-war movements, student takeovers, rebellion in the culture. And one essential part of it all, a very critical part, a very radical challenge to thousands of years of traditions chains on women. That was one of the most important things that we fought for. And at that time, it was the right to abortion. Within this movement for women's liberation, the right to abortion stood out. Now, this was never a full enough victory, Roe v. Wade. And it wasn't enough to fully liberate women, but it changed things enormously. But almost immediately, the right to abortion, and all of us who fought for it, faced a powerful backlash unleashed from the highest offices in the land. Today, more than 40 years after that victory, abortion has never been more dangerous to provide, more difficult to access, or more stigmatized to get. And all of this has reached a true state of emergency. Next, we will hear firsthand and very intimate testimony from 3 of the heroes who not only stepped in to provide abortions, but persevered when providing abortions became the only medical practice in existence where you took your life in your hands. Your life was on the line every time you stepped out the door or went into a clinic. These 3 courageous women, whose messages and stories we are going to hear about, are Susan Wickland, author of This Common Secret, which tells about her experience as an abortion doctor serving women in many states. Susan Cahill, whose clinic in Montana was so severely vandalized on March 3rd, yes, this March 3rd, that it has had to be shut down indefinitely. And Susan Robinson, one of the 4 remaining abortion providers in the country who openly do late-term procedures. We call this next segment The 3 Susans. And this will be followed by a poem written by Marge Piercy and read by Louise Bernikow, a writer, lecturer, and activist with roots in the women's liberation movement.
My name is Star Davis, and I am reading the part of Susan Wickman. I was the only doctor that day, feeling those first-day jitters. I'd done hundreds of abortions, but never as the sole physician in a facility. I felt like the most important and dramatic moment of my professional life was happening. A group of protesters circled the front door, a dozen or more. When I walked toward them, they assumed I was a patient coming in for an abortion. "Mommy, don't kill your baby. Let us help you. You'll die in there," they shouted. "You'll bleed to death. You'll never get pregnant again. Mommy, Mommy, please don't kill me." Their shouts barely registered. I was concentrating hard on the work waiting for me. I shouldered through them without breaking stride and found more welcoming staff inside. They were so warm and friendly, obviously appreciative, but I'm sure they were more than a little anxious about this new doctor. I shared that anxious undercurrent. Today, the responsibility was all mine. The time passed quickly. I met patient after patient, established a rapport with each one, earned their trust. It felt so good to finally be in a clinic, providing the service I knew was so vital to the physical and emotional health of women. Time and again, I flashed back to how callously and cruelly I had been treated during my own abortion. I carried those memories into every meeting. It reinforced my confidence and commitment to hear the concerns women shared. It was even more reassuring to see patients in the recovery room. The women were comfortable, healthy, and relieved, and in a palpable way, they seemed empowered. It's been nearly 20 years since that first day, but one woman remains sharp in my memory. She was well-dressed, articulate, composed. Every hair was in place. Perfect makeup. When we talked before the abortion, she was straightforward and unemotional. She revealed no inner turmoil and answered my questions briefly, but with obvious determination. I tried to get her to engage with me on a more personal level, but she remained businesslike and direct. No hand-wringing or outpouring of emotions. During the procedure, she remained completely still and calm. She made no sound, asked no questions. I talked as I worked, explaining what I was doing and telling her to please speak up if she were uncomfortable. When the abortion was finished, I rolled back from the bed on my stool and began picking up instruments. When the nurse began checking her blood pressure, the patient lifted her head and caught my eye. "We're through?" she asked in a hushed voice. I nodded. She let her head down and spoke to the ceiling in a slightly louder voice. "Does this mean I'm not pregnant anymore?" There was a new tone in her voice. She sounded like she was ready to explode. "Yes, it does," I almost whispered back. "Yay! Yes! Yes! Yes!" The shriek of primal relief echoed in the room. I jerked away in surprise, almost falling backward on my stool. Her arms shot up in triumph, like an athlete after a game-winning point. I had thought she was immune to emotion. All of this had been so carefully pinned up. All the tension, the weight of her situation, all of it locked behind her impeccable facade. Until now. Now she wore a smile that wouldn't fade. She released the flood of concerns that she was free of, some of them planted by the words of the protesters out front. She and I talked about the insensitive actions and outright lies spewed by those protesters. We talked about how hard it had been for her to walk through the gauntlet and how difficult it would be for women who weren't as strong as she was. Young women, for instance. Women with no one to turn to for support. Women who didn't know the facts about abortion. Later that day, when I left the clinic, I saw the protesters differently. They were no longer just a nuisance. They were a force that had a negative impact on my patients, planting unnecessary fear and guilt in women at this vulnerable crossroads. Their rhetoric and self-righteous pleading were misleading and alarming. I knew, looking at them, that the last thing they cared about was the safety and well-being of the women that I had seen that day.
This is titled, "The Energy of Hate Was Palpable." March 2014. My landlord said that he was going to sell the business. He asked me if I wanted to buy the building, but I didn't really want to take on that big a project. You know, I may be retiring in a couple of years. I didn't think it would sell right anyway, but it did. An anti-choice person bought it and said I had to get out. It's not easy for me because I do abortions to find a place to rent, but I did. So I got out of there in minus 15 degrees with a huge amount of help from very dear friends, moved my office to this new location. And after spending a lot of money and time, fixed it up, new paint, cabinets, lots of stuff, I started seeing patients on the 11th of February. There's a lot of things to do when you move a medical office, lots. Just getting everything organized, remembering where you put new stuff after 6.5 years of being in a different place. We were just starting to feel like we were getting settled. It looked really nice. The sun was coming out again, and it wasn't minus 15 anymore, and I had almost finished the security system. I had cameras in, but this was a new system, and the person on Monday, the 3rd of March, said to me, "Tomorrow, I will finish it." I said, "Great," because the next day, 40 days of life protests were going to start, and I wanted it up for that. So that was what happened on Monday. I remember actually walking around after everybody had left thinking, we did a really good job with this new place. I was really happy with it. The next morning I was getting ready to go to work, and my secretary receptionist comes in before me and said she went in to go to the back door and she saw that the glass had been broken. By the time I got there, the police would not allow us to go in. The FBI was there, and actually, this was a Tuesday, we didn't get to see the damage until Wednesday afternoon. So by Wednesday afternoon, they finally let me in after doing all of their investigation, and it's really hard. In fact, every time I think about it, I start crying because it's really very difficult to understand the devastation that was there. And everything kept running through my mind. And it was only 3 weeks ago that all of my dearest friends and colleagues helped me create this place. And now it was completely destroyed. And the energy of hate in that place was palpable. Because not only did this person take meticulous care to damage every possible thing you can imagine, but on top of that, I have prints and paintings and things through the years that represent important things for me that I put up. They were totally destroyed. As well as my, pictures of my family, where holes were stabbed in their faces. Everything. And then every piece of medical equipment was destroyed in some manner or another. He put iodine and sprayed it all over everything. He took the fire extinguisher and sprayed the dust. I mean, we're still dealing with this in the little room that we have now, trying to get our charts in order. Every time you pull a chart, the smell comes again. I go to sleep with that smell in my nose. So it was complete devastation. They pulled my plants from the roots. And besides that, he went downstairs in the basement and completely destroyed the heating and plumbing as well. So it was not mere vandalism. And it certainly wasn't random. It was an attack on me. There was absolutely no doubt about that.
I'm reading Susan Robinson. This is called Chasing the Abortion. I think a lot of people just say to themselves in a very superficial way, why do these women wait so long? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So my goal is to explain to you some of the reasons that people have very late abortions. Here are some reasons for you. Over half of the patients had no idea they were pregnant until well into the second trimester. And people go, how is that possible? And I go, well, it's possible enough that there was a reality TV program called Didn't Know I Was Pregnant that lasted for 3 seasons. Okay? This is not a rare event. And then, if the woman is well off, she doesn't have a problem. She does whatever she needs to do, gets the abortion right away. But poor women do not have these options. They do not have the money, and they do not have voices. And those women, oh my God, they find out they're pregnant, and let's say they're 18 weeks along. A lot of people don't even find out that they're pregnant until they're 20 weeks along, either because they have irregular periods, or they're on a form of birth control that makes their periods either irregular or absent. Women say, the doctor told me I would never get pregnant. Or, my partner told me he had a vasectomy. Or, I was on the pill. Or, I was on an IUD. Or, I was getting devil shots. And they told me that it would make my period stop. There are a million ways to not know that you're pregnant. So, poor women. And this is getting worse and worse. She has to figure out how to get transportation to a clinic. She has to figure out if she's got a job, how to get 2 days off, or depending on how pregnant she is, if it's in her 3rd trimester, to get 4 or 5 days off from work. She has to arrange childcare. She has to chase down the money for an abortion. And we have tons of patients who found out that they were pregnant at 18 weeks, and ever since then, they've been chasing the cost of the abortion. You understand what I mean by that? Chasing the abortion. By the time they raise the money that it costs for an 18-week abortion, by that time they're 22 weeks. And then they have to go get some more money. The money is a huge problem, thanks to the goddamn highwaymen. We've had a few patients who are developmentally very disabled. They had no idea what pregnancy was, or what intercourse, or what anything was. We've had women who had to escape in order to go and get an abortion because their male captor would not let them go. We've had a lot of patients who at first thought, oh yeah, this is great, I'm 18 weeks pregnant. Okay, that's okay. He and I are going to make it work somehow. And then, as often happens, the male becomes more and more abusive, and then the woman comes to realize that if she has a baby with him, she's going to be tied to this person for 21 years. Let's say you're clean and sober, but then your partner gets put in jail for a felony. So there you are, back on the street, and your partner is in jail. We have women who slipped a roofie and didn't have any idea they were pregnant because they thought they were virgins. I mean, I know these stories. You stand in a room full of pro-choice people, and you start fleshing out what poor people go through, and they get it very quickly. People think that late abortion is too frequent, too casual. Well, it's not too frequent. I mean, it's fewer than 1/10 of 1% of all the abortions done in this country. It's a minuscule number, and it's certainly not casual. Women come to the United States and Canada, come from all over the United States and Canada, and all over the world, too. People come from Europe, from Australia, from Afghanistan. These people are not coming making a decision casually. They are making a huge, determined commitment to get this procedure done. It's not like I'm pushing abortion. I'm pushing patient autonomy. And my sort of bottom line message is that women are experts on their own lives. They're adults, capable of handling difficult, ethical issues and arriving at the correct decision for themselves and their families. And these decisions may differ from women to women. That's fine. This is about autonomy, patient autonomy, and a woman's ownership over her own body. They are not housing units. They are not life support systems. They are not incubation pods. And people get that if they're pro-choice. And if they're not pro-choice, they walk away saying, wow, this is a lot more complicated than I thought. This calls for a lot of compassion all the way around. And that's really what I want.
The story we're telling gets worse and worse. So, Marge Piercy, who I'm channeling for you tonight, wrote a poem that I'm going to read, and I actually had to look up the episode that provoked it, because the violence against providers and against clinics sort of disappears into some total haze. 1994, New Year's Eve. Crazy person, believing that he was pro-life and that the way to communicate that was by killing people, walked into 2 different clinics in Brookline, Massachusetts, and in each of them he pulled out a rifle and he shot a receptionist in one, and a receptionist in the second, and he wounded 5 people who were just there. And this is the poem called For 2 Women Shot to Death in Brookline, Massachusetts. How dare a woman choose? Choose to be pregnant, choose to be childless, choose to be lesbian, choose to have 2 lovers or none, choose to abort, choose to live alone, choose to walk alone at night, choose to come and to go without permission, without leave, without a man. Consider a woman's blood spilled on a desk, pooled on an office floor, an ordinary morning at work, an ordinary morning of helping other women choose to be or not to be pregnant, means she has fallen into death. A woman young and smiling, sitting at a desk, trying to put other women at ease, now bleeds from 5 large wounds, bleeding from her organs, bleeding out her life. A young man is angry at women. Women who say no, women who say maybe and mean no, women who won't, women who do and they shouldn't. If they are pregnant, they are bad, because that proves they did it with someone. They did it and should die. A man gets angry with a woman who decides to leave him, who decides to walk off, who decides to walk, who decides. Women are not real to such men, they should behave as meat. Such men drag them into the woods and stab them, climb in their windows and rape them. Such men shoot them in kitchens. Such men strangle them in bed. Such men lie in wait and ambush them in parking lots. Such men walk into a clinic and kill the first woman they see in harm's way, meaning in the way of a man who is tasting his anger like rare steak. A daily, ordinary courage, doing what has to be done every morning, every afternoon, doing it over and over because it is needed, put them in harm's way. 2 women dying because a man chose that they die. 2 women dying because they did their job, helping other women survive. 2 women dead from the stupidity of an ex-altar boy who saw himself as a fetus, who pumped his sullen fury automatically into the woman in front of him twice and intended more. Stand up now and say, no more. Stand up now and say, we stand up and say, we will not be ruled by crazies and killers, by shotguns and bombs and acid. We will not dwell in the caves of fear. We will make each other strong. We will make each other safe. There is no other monument.
Thank you so much to all the actors for that extremely powerful testimony and for that poem. And, you know, like you said, I mean, this is a very heavy, a very ugly reality that we have brought alive tonight. And, but I think we need to remind ourselves, and actually also came out through the end of that poem, that it doesn't actually have to be this way. We're actually all here gathered tonight because we understand that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can actually forge a way out of this. And it starts with actually confronting the reality that we're doing tonight, but ultimately, it's up to us to change it. So, the next speaker that I want to bring up is Dr. Willie Parker, who is an abortion provider whose religious faith compelled him to provide abortions. He began as an obstetrician, and through the course of his practice, he encountered many patients who needed abortions. Dr. Willie Parker decided to fill this great need, and he has won many awards over the years for his great courage and commitment in providing abortions for women, especially in the Deep South. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Parker on the Abortion Rights Freedom Ride at an event in Chicago, and I was so moved by his level of determination to continue to providing abortions for women in the face of harassment from anti-abortion fanatics and restrictions which threatened to shut down the clinics that he works at, including the last clinic in Mississippi. After the Chicago event, Dr. Parker came to hang out with myself and the other volunteers, and I got a chance to talk with him. And I'll never forget this totally selfless statement that he made. That at one point he decided he could not think about what would happen to him with providing abortions. What became principle was thinking about what would happen to the women if he did not provide this necessary service. So,
Good evening. It is very much my pleasure to be here. And as was alluded to, the topic is very weighty and it's very heavy. So it reminded me of a story to lighten the moment. I once came to the podium to speak, and we did a sound check, and the person said, "My, you have such a wonderful radio voice. You should be a DJ." And just to demonstrate to you that what is heard is more important than what is said, my response was, "So does that mean I don't have a face for TV?" again, I say what is heard is more important than what is said. I have such a great deal of delight at being here at the invitation from Sunsara, who called me about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago, to ask if I could come to New York to participate in this event. She told me what it was about. The universe conspired to make this happen in that I'm working in Philly this week, this weekend, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I provided services for women today and took the train up, and so I was a little bit delayed when I came in. It was, for me, reminiscent of the legacy of the civil rights movement. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and while I was not old enough to actually physically participate, I was born in 1962, but by the time I began to ride the Greyhound bus, which I rode 2 weeks ago to Jackson, Mississippi, I remember sitting in the same waiting room where you can only paint around a whites only sign for so long, and when you take it down, you can see the silhouette of where the sign was. So I grew up in that legacy of oppression and poverty and racism. And it was out of that legacy that I came to understand my own sense of purpose and motivation. And for me, the journey around becoming a reproductive justice advocate starts with my upbringing in the South, in the Black Baptist Church as a Protestant fundamentalist, with all of the things that go with that. And it was in that upbringing that my foundation was laid around understanding the world a certain way, in a very concrete, literal, black and white kind of way. And then when I went away to college, it began my wrestling with conscience. And someone once said that when you wrestle with your conscience and you lose, you actually win. And that wrestle for me began when I first had the opportunity to make the effort to think for myself. And it intensified as I finished medical school and chose as my specialty OBGYN, women's care. And while I had never had any explicit teaching in my upbringing around abortion being wrong, it was sort of implied in my community where there's a very high teen pregnancy rate, that if a woman became pregnant, it was her duty and responsibility to give birth to that child. And so I saw many women, including my mother and a couple of my sisters, trapped into poverty by premature mothering, unplanned pregnancies. And so that was in the back of my mind as I was nurtured by women who took care of me, nurtured me, and believed in me, and protected me, and sent me on my way to college, where I eventually went to medical school. And when I chose OBGYN as my discipline, I never questioned whether or not a woman had the right to make the decision to have an abortion. I just felt conflicted about what it would mean to me to provide that. And so that wrestling match with my conscience continued throughout medical school and eventually culminated in whereas I was encased in this very rigid fundamentalist understanding about right and wrong and felt unable to provide the care for women that I knew they needed. That shell was cracked by a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King, where he took the story of the Good Samaritan and very skillfully raised the question of what made the Good Samaritan good. And in that story, the Samaritan who stopped to help someone who he should have had no vested interest in and took care of him, whereas the people who should have had a community interest in that person did not. Dr. King said that what made the Good Samaritan good was that whereas the people who should have had vested interest passed the person by and asked the question, what will happen to me if I stop to help this person? The Samaritan reversed the question of concern and asked, what would happen to women? What would happen to this person if I don't stop to help him? And that resonated deeply with me as a women's health provider who daily saw women who were plagued by unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or very wanted, lethally flawed ones. And so I then felt empowered to ask the question to myself, what happens to these women who are my patients if I don't help them? And then my concern about what happens to me gave way to what happens to those patients. And so it sort of woke me up. And in the same vein, just as Dr. Martin Luther King preached a sermon called Remaining Awake in the Midst of a Revolution, analogously, I found myself needing to wake up in the midst of a devolution, the devolution of reproductive rights. To, if someone were to have gone to sleep on January 23rd, 1973, feeling secure that women's rights had been secured and were to wake up last week, that person would find themselves with a legacy of the Hyde Amendment being almost 40 plus years old, and now women in many states having access to one clinic or no clinic, and having onerous tasks placed on them to secure the rights that should be guaranteed them by the Constitution. And so it's with that realization that I do my work, and it prompted me and prompts me to ask you in my best Southern grandma vernacular, in face of this, what is we gonna do? What is we gonna do? What are we gonna do on behalf of our sisters and mothers and partners? For me, reproductive justice and this work that I do of healthcare called abortion is a specific context in which to do human rights work. And it's merely for me the choice to not be more of a man or a black person or a straight person or a Christian than I am a human being. And if any of those identities compete with my humanity, I outright reject them all. And so it's in that regard that I cannot allow concern about what might happen to me physically to override my willingness to help women in their greatest moment of need. Because I'm far more concerned about a death of spirit than I am leaving the planet. You know, the reality that I knew Dr. George Tiller, that I now work in the clinic in Montgomery where Dr. Gunn worked, and people still remember him fondly. I could become concerned about what could happen to me. But that would be more of a concern about how I'm going to die. And I'm more concerned about how I'm going to live. And I choose to live feeling deeply and intensely connected to my fellow human beings. And I choose to participate in the inescapable mutual garment of destiny that Dr. King talked about. And so it's because of that I'm excited that we're here tonight, again, in the spirit of the church meetings that Dr. King and those guys call the common folk together to say, okay, there's no savior coming. The savior has to come from you. You have to save yourselves. And we have to save ourselves as one common humanity. And this is the beginning of that process, and I'm delighted to participate. And I say that I will stand with you in solidarity, and I will indulge myself of the support that I feel from you as I endeavor to provide health care and compassion to the women of our country. Thank you.
Okay, now before having our next speaker, I'm going to take a couple of minutes here and ask you, how important is it that what you just heard and are going to hear gets out to people? Not just a few people, but millions of people. What would it do to their thinking about abortion, about women, about what we need to do, about the righteousness of standing with the women who need services, the doctors who so strongly and valiantly provide them with, Dr. Willie Parker. Could we get the baskets to just pass down here quickly? Yes, because I'm going to ask you, and this is for you at home too, to go to StopPatriarchy.org and make a pledge. Make a pledge for as much as you can, because this isn't, like we were talking about, a journey earlier. We're taking a journey tonight. We're deepening our understanding. We're deepening our commitment. But this has to go farther. And it is going farther with all the people who are watching this elsewhere. But we've all got to be part of helping massively change people's thinking and what they do to change the situation. That's what this is about. And that's what your funds are needed for. Give as generously as you can.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce Bill Baird. Bill Baird is a pioneer. Bill Baird is a pioneer of the reproductive rights movement. He was arrested 8 times in 5 states for lecturing on birth control. In 1972, he acted as defendant and lawyer. Mind you, he did not have a law degree in arguing for and winning the right for unmarried women to access birth control. He led the first ever protest in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral for women's rights 48 years ago. And he is someone who at age 81 has traveled 4 hours to be with us tonight and will be out in the streets with us tomorrow once again at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Well, first of all, I am so moved by all your speakers. What great people. You're watching history unravel before you tonight. And it's important that this tape be heard and that we do this all across the country. I spoke recently at Rockville, what's the name of the school again? Blanking out. SUNY. These young people have no idea that someone, whether it be Bill Baird or anybody else, could go to prison, not that many years ago, for merely lecturing about birth control or abortion rights. So tonight was so powerful. The brave young doctor that was here is about 30 years separating us. Different generation. I went to medical school also, if you know that. But my daughter was born in the middle of medical school. And a funny thing happens. You find out you can't afford to go on and do the things you want to. And I decided to challenge the stupidity of laws. And way back in 1963, right up the block from here, a place called Harlem Hospital, I was clinical director for a drug company called EMCO that made a birth control foam. And I heard a scream, unlike anything I ever heard. I raced into the hallway, and I saw this young black mother covered with blood from the waist down. And I caught her. And I noticed she had an 8-inch piece of wire coat hanger sticking out of her body. And she died. I was absolutely outraged that she could not have the right, not to an abortion only, but not the right to birth control. And I thought, that's stupid. I thought it was vicious. What I'm going to say next offends some of you, but I told the dear friends who invited me, I will not rewrite history, nor will I let it be rewritten as it has been. I went to Planned Parenthood. I said, look, there are laws here. Will you fight it? Planned Parenthood's literature said abortion takes the life of a child. They were opposed to abortion. There it is, 1963, the early 60s. There was no now. I went to the welfare department. It's against the law. So I said, yeah, someone's got to do something. Why not me? 1965, I spoke in Hampton, Long Island. I had a mobile clinic. I went to poor areas, Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Long Island. The van was surrounded by police, dragged out of the van, handcuffed, charged with indecent exposure of obscene objects, birth control devices, and put in prison. That arrest focused attention from Percy Sutton, Assemblyman, and we got the law changed. A little town in New Jersey called Freehold, New Jersey, if you've ever heard of it, a man named Marcus Daly had the absolutely vicious idea he would jail unwed mothers. This was his thinking. If they're unwed and they're pregnant, if I put them in jail, they won't have intercourse. Not the guy, the woman. They won't have intercourse, and this will lower the welfare costs. See, isn't that stupid? Why not teach them birth control? I called him up and said, Baird, don't you know it's against the law? So I said, don't you know I'm going to come and fight you? And I showed up on September the 16th, 1966, and get this picture, surrounded in the Mobile Clinic by about 50, literally 50 police with shotguns, pistols. All I had was a can of foam, diaphragm, and a pill. I was arrested, convicted, and put in prison for 20 days. Why I tell you that? Beautiful young people at Boston University, 800, signed a petition that said, Bill Baird, would you come to Massachusetts? I live in New York. Would you fight a law? The law was called Crimes Against Chastity, Morality, Decency, and Good Order. It carried with it a 10-year jail term. I read the law, I said, you crazy. I don't know anybody, I have no money. I'm just relatively poor. I grew up in the slums of Brooklyn, one of 6 kids. 2 died from poverty. And I said, no. And I thought about that mother who died. I said, you know what? If by some good fortune the U.S. Supreme Court could hear me, maybe, this is how my head worked, I could get the law changed that birth control would become legal on the basis of privacy, but also it might be the foundation for the right to abortion. But you know what else? Gay people. Before it was fashionable, I was fighting for gay people. I said, why don't gay people have that same right? So I said, you know what, I'm going to fight that law. April 6, 1967, I stood before 2,500 people. I gave a speech, and this was the headline. I don't know how well you can see it. Vice Squad, which normally picks up prostitutes, nabbed Boston University birth control speaker. I had said women and women alone must have the absolute freedom. No husband, no family, no judge, no one, that woman alone must be the one to make that decision. I also said the Catholic Church must learn to mind their own business. And if someone tried to stand up and say, never again. So you know what I did? I stood up there. And I held up Time magazine. The cover of Time magazine in April 1967 had the birth control pills, picture of them on the cover. I pasted on top of it St. Joseph's aspirin that looked like the pill. And I take the real pill. And I said to the cops, mind you, 2,500 people, about 20 police, will you arrest me for showing the real pill, the photograph of the pill, or something that looks like the pill? I thought that would be smart because the law would be declared unconstitutional because it was vague. Well, lo and behold, they didn't move. What would you do? There's no book written how to be a social reformer. I read the Bible without offending my beloved doctor friend who believes in the Bible, which I really don't. But in the Bible it says, Genesis 38, 9 through 11, God told Onan to have intercourse with his dead brother's wife. Remember what he did? He had the intercourse already. But he withdrew and spilled his seed on the ground. Spilling your seed on the ground is called withdrawal or coitus interruptus. Now the law said you cannot print, publish, give any information of any means whatsoever. Therefore the Bible was against the law. I thought it was great, right? Police were fuming but didn't move. And mind you, my job was to be arrested so I could be heard. I then picked up a little pamphlet called The Rhythm Method by Monsignor Conway out of Boston. Mind you what the law said, you can't print or publish. I said, I want you to arrest Cardinal Cushing, who's their beloved God, because he distributed a Catholic booklet called The Rhythm, which is a means of birth control. Nothing happened. I'm determined, as they knew I was, how do I get this before the court so I can get heard by the Supreme Court? And by the way, I don't know if you know this figure. You know how many people or cases appear before the court that are accepted? 98% are rejected. I only got a 2% chance. And a 100% chance of going to jail if I lose. So the next thing I did, I gave and I raised a 19-year-old young lady one condom, and a package of foam. The moment I put it in our hands, the police leaped up on the stage, started to handcuff me. I said, stop. I held up, because all the TV cameras were there, the foam. Attached to it, I bought it from Zayre's department store. Hear that word carefully. Zayre's department store. Department stores can't sell birth control. Only drugstores can. So I walked them into a trap. I had Zayre's department store. It said $3, but you know what else? 9-cent sales tax. I said, wait a second. How do you collect an illegal sales tax on an illegal sale? Therefore, your attorney general should go to jail with you. Thought that was brilliant, right? But I'm the only one who's talking about it. But the moment I gave the 19-year-old, listen carefully, why did I give it to a 9-year-old the phone? In those days, if you're under 21, you were a minor. Today, if you're under 18, you're a minor. So my head was working. I want to get the right of a minor, unmarried female. I was convicted as a felon, put in a place called the Charles Street Prison. If you know anything about that prison, it's one of the worst prisons in the United States. Had to deal with beatings, rats in my threat of raper. I'm not a tough guy. I'm just a stubborn guy. I was in with very tough people. But finally, the United States Supreme Court heard me. On March 22nd, 1972, they said these words to every one of you here and women across this nation, and to every doctor. If the right of privacy means anything, right of privacy means anything, the right of the individual to be free, to decide whether to bear or beget a child. That was the foundation for Roe v. Wade, as I anticipated it would. A couple of years later, the rights of teenagers, a case called Baird versus Goliath, my case as well. Had a fight, and the law said if you're a teenager, you need written permission. Anyway, to kind of sum it up, the court said about the right of privacy, when it came to teenagers, they were a neglected group. I fought for that, and the court said, well, a minor is too young to make the decision. Well, if you're too young to make the decision, are you not too young to have a child? Does that make sense? Also, do you know if you have a child, you change legally, you call it an emancipated minor. So that's how I argued. And finally the court said, no, Baird, 8-1, you're correct. Teenagers have rights. So to sum this up, all I wish to tell you is this. A little slower. Ate a little bit more than normal, but it was worth the four-hour ride to come here. But I need your help to get this message out. What I have in me, no one in this country has, and I don't mean that arrogantly. I saw this law since 1963. I fought the power of people like Planned Parenthood and others who would not support birth control for unmarried people in those areas. So they have nothing to do with me. They've rewritten history. I don't even exist. If you knew Baird v. ICC, most of you even heard of the case. But that's the case that gave every doctor the right to prescribe birth control for unmarried people. So I'll ask you this. Take my hand. Take my hand. I've given you my life, 51 years. I've lost the first wife, children, was arrested by the police with a baby in the audience because I contaminated the morals of a baby because they saw a diaphragm. The crap I've gone through. All I ask you, help me get this message out. Help me speak in your community. And realize that just because I'm a male, there are great men who, good doctor, who will fight for you. And there are lots of women like Michelle, whatever her name is, all these women who will fight against you. Not all men are your enemy, not all women are your ally. Take me as your brother. Take me as somebody who really loves you, cares about you, and let me continue the fight with you. Thank you.
I'm going to be introducing and bringing up Merle Hoffman. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit about Merle. She's the founder and president of Choices Women's Medical Center, and this was established 2 years before Roe v. Wade. It was established in 1971, right after New York State legalized abortion. She's also publisher and editor-in-chief of On the Issues magazine, and she's the author of her memoir, Intimate Wars. Now, I could take the rest of the evening talking about my experiences with Merle, but I won't, because she has some very important things to say. But I just want to say that Merle, when abortion was legalized in New York, stepped in to fill a great need, providing the essential services for women that they need. But she didn't stop there, because when this right became increasingly embattled, she stepped forward and took responsibility for getting into the political fight. She debated Jerry Falwell in the early years of attacks on abortion and put him to shame. She organized the New York City Pro-Choice Coalition, where we pioneered mass clinic defense against Operation Rescue. And 25 years ago this week, she and I joined together in the first ever civil disobedience for abortion rights at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the very place where we hope you're going to be joining us tomorrow at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock at St. Pat's. So this is the legacy and the example she's going to talk about. And so I'm going to let Merle take it from there.
So Mary Lou and I have been comrades in arms in many great actions, many a revolutionary struggle. I want to say how moving it is really for me to be here and to hear you, Dr. Parker, because it catalyzes and inspires me and my deep level of commitment. Tomorrow, you are going to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral. You are going to stand in front of that power structure like we did 25 years ago. And like Martin Luther at Wittenberg with his 95 theses, we said, here we stand, we can do no other. We held up a 6-foot-high coat hanger, and the coat hanger is a symbol both of the reality of the oppression of women's lives and our commitment to the resistance of that oppression. That action lit the flames and spread an inspiration around this country of what it meant to be pro-choice. And through all of these years, we have stood our ground, not the ground of compromise, not the ground of capitulation, not the ground of false optimism, but the ground of resistance, right thinking, compassion, and courage. Because we understand that the power of the state must stop at our skin. The power of the state must stop at our skin. And we understand the basic principle that the act of abortion and choice is about power. It is women at their most powerful, deciding the right of fetal existence, defining what grows within them as a welcoming event or an overwhelming assault. It is time to occupy the abortion debate with truth. And the truth is, it is not politics, but necessity that drives women's choices and forms the political and theoretical foundations of the fundamental right to choose. The reality of abortion is about struggle, and it is about survival, and the crushing fundamental truth that you are responsible for the life within you, and you have the power to make the choice to decide, and you have the right to make the wrong choice, In 1971, I was only 25 years old, and I founded one of the first 3 legal abortion facilities in the country. And I remember very well the first patient who came to me. And she came from New Jersey, because abortion was illegal in New Jersey. And I think we're going to go back and see that very, very soon again. And she was white. She was married. She was about 25 years old. She had 1 child with her. And she was terrified because she was pregnant and she didn't want to be. And here I was, this is the first patient, and she's here. And there's no abortion counseling. There's no history. There's no realistic concept. I had to create. I had to evolve this. So I spoke to her, and I held her hand throughout the abortion procedure, and her hand has become for me the catalytic event and the inspiration that has stayed with me throughout these past 43 years. In 1976, I became political because of the Hyde Amendment. I heard Henry Hyde, the Republican congressman, say, well, if we can't save all the babies, we'll just save These were poor women who were my patients, and I found this egregious. So I went into Queens College, my alma mater, and I walked down the halls, and I created a pamphlet, a one-page pamphlet, and I asked the professors to go in and say, may I speak to the students? And they said, oh, sure, it didn't look too dangerous. And I said, do you realize what's happened? They've cut off Medicaid funds for poor women. Poor women will suffer. Poor women will die. And they said, well, I can always go to Pennsylvania or Puerto Rico or London, So there was that immediate knowledge of bifurcation that was spoken about by one of the previous speakers. It's not me, but now we're in a situation that me has become we. Me has become we. And we're living in what I call the time of abortionomics. Okay? Abortionomics is the reality that 73% of women who have abortions do it for economic reasons. If in fact they can't reach or access an abortion facility, they either go to Mexico for mifepristone, or else they're forced into unwanted enslaved pregnancy. So I had my own abortion in 1982, and I made that decision. And when I came out of that, I had a patient who was 19 years old, and she came up and she spoke to me and she said, I really wanted this pregnancy. Mother in me wanted it, wanted to love it, wanted to see it grow, but the other part didn't. And it was like the other mother. Well, there is no other mother, because abortion is a mother's act. Abortion is a mother's act. 1989 was a very hard year. We were filled in the streets with Operation Rescue. I remember running down the streets with Randall Terry running next to me, seeing who could get to Planned Parenthood first. We wanted to keep the doors open. He wanted to keep them closed. He won that skirmish. And then there was the time that I was almost battered by the police in front of a clinic in Queens. We had a lot of difficult times with the Pro-Choice Coalition at that point in time. We wanted to do something that would get the attention of everyone. So that was how the action of St. Patrick's came about. We wanted to get arrested. 9 people were arrested, and loads of us just sat down and protest. I want to read what was written on my proclamation. 5 great principles, because I think these are eternal about this issue. We said, women are full moral agents with the right and the ability to choose when and whether or not to be mothers. Abortion is a choice made by each individual woman for profound personal reasons that no man or state should judge. The right to make reproductive choices is women's legacy throughout history and belongs to every woman, regardless of race, age, class, religion, or sexual preference. Brave words, important words, true words, but they're just words nonetheless. What must be done, and where are we now? We have to occupy the abortion debate with truth. We have to talk about the truth of women's lives, the choices they make, and the truth about why they make them. We must own our own experiences and be forthright in determining that abortion is indeed a mother's act and a moral choice. We must practice courage and be able to get ready for a deeper level of commitment, civil disobedience, being arrested, whatever is necessary. We must provide support to providers, because without providers there is no choice. We must work in coalitions with other social justice movements, recast the struggle as a civil and human rights struggle for reproductive justice. We have to draw a line in the sand, hold it, and as my friend Phil Kennedy always used to say, we've you've got to love the struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Merle. So next, I'm going to introduce Sunsara Taylor. Sunsara Taylor is a writer for Revolution newspaper, initiator of the movement End Porn and Patriarchy, the enslavement and degradation of women, or StopPatriarchy for short. She led this summer's Abortion Rights Freedom Ride, which I was lucky enough to be part of. She has fearlessly taken on reactionaries such as Bill O'Reilly, among others. She was arrested at St. Patrick's Cathedral, seems to be a theme tonight, 2 years ago for screaming inside the sanctuary during a service, "Stop the war on women, abortion on demand and without apology." And one thing most people don't know about Sunsara is that she began getting involved with politics as a teenager, defending the last abortion clinic in North Dakota after the first murder of an abortion doctor. She's an incredible inspiration to myself and many others, and needs to be to many more. Sunsara.
Well, it has just been a great honor and a thrill to be here and listen to Merle and Bill and Willie and Donna before, and Marge and David on video, and everybody who's here and everybody who's watching at home. Tonight we have heard the reality of what happens to women's lives when abortion is not available. The foreclosure of women's lives, the enslavement of all women, and the fear that all women have to live with when that right is not accessible. We've also heard tonight and gone up close with the realities of the danger encroaching on women's right to abortion today, the emergency that exists. The voices of the providers on the front lines, the terror at the clinics, the harassment of the women, and I would add to this that there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of clinic closures in the last 3 years in New Mexico, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Montana, in Texas, all over this country, in Virginia, and it goes on, and there have been hundreds of laws that have been passed that give the force of the state and the permanence behind all of this. And this is a very dangerous trajectory that we have to confront head on, because it has the danger of even greater momentum behind it if it is not stopped. By now it should be clear that this truly is a state of emergency. There really is a war on women, not only here, but all over the world. It should also be clear that this fight over abortion has never been about babies. It has always been about the control over women. It has been a fight over whether women will be reduced to breeders of children, mere vessels, or whether women will be regarded as full human beings. And while the fight over abortion, and yes, over birth control, is one very concentrated dimension of this war, it is also just one part. This war on women is also being fought out in the epidemic of rape across the world, from the Congo to India to the dorm rooms of the U.S. college campuses. It's being fought out in the way that pornography is becoming ever more cruel and degrading, ever more humiliating and violent, even as it's becoming more and more mainstream. This war is being fought in the millions and millions of women and very young girls who are kidnapped, sold by starving families, tricked, drugged, and beaten into sexual slavery, all over the world, including here in this country, where the average age of entrance into prostitution is 12 years old. This war is being fought in the culture, where it is somehow acceptable to do to women what you cannot do to any other section of people, from the rape jokes to talk of bitches and hoes, to the celebration of pimping and puritanical shaming of women. In every realm and from every angle, the question is being fought out. What will the role of women be in society? And so if we do not like what is shaping up, if we reject what we have heard tonight, then we have to answer that question ourselves. What is the role of women in society? Women are full human beings, capable of participating fully and equally in every realm of human endeavor. Women are not objects. Women are not things to be used or abused for the sexual pleasure of men. Women are not breeders. Women do not exist to make babies. Women are full human beings. And we should be fighting for for a world where women are treated as such. So I want you to imagine with me. Imagine a world without rape. Imagine if women could walk the earth any time of day or night, free of the fear that they could be attacked and raped, whether on the streets or in their own homes. Imagine what it would feel like if women were really lifted, had that burden lifted from them. Imagine if never again did a woman have to know what it was like to sell herself and her body on a desperate attempt to feed herself or her child. Imagine if instead sexuality and intimacy became for everyone, something that people engaged in only when it was free and voluntary, and on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and a shared desire. Imagine a society in which women were not evaluated on the basis of physical beauty standards, their human worth and potential reduced to one or another body part. Imagine boys and men growing up without being inundated with pornography and images of women's bodies half naked and half starved in demeaned and degraded positions, and instead of being polluted with all that, were actually enabled to see women as full human beings. Imagine if abortion and birth control were available on demand and without apology. And imagine if everyone learned the truth about women's reproduction and the science of it, and the scientific method more generally, so that never again could so-called holy men prey on people's ignorance to prevent or to shame women from exercising these rights. Imagine if rearing up children were no longer seen as the sole or the main responsibility of women. If children were no longer seen as the property of their parents, neither expected to fulfill their parents' dreams, nor lacking opportunities because of their parents' hardships, but instead society as a whole took responsibility for the nourishing and the flourishing of children. Imagine if the pent-up anger of women, from thousands and thousands of years of traditions' chains, were, instead of being suffocated and directed inward, were unleashed and used as a force to fight to change everything that's unjust and unacceptable about this world. All this is possible. There is nothing in human nature that prevents this from being. But there is a force behind this war. There is a system behind this war, and it's a system called capitalism. And it's going to take, I've become convinced, a revolution to get rid of this system, to dig up the roots of this war on women and the oppression that is fueling it, as well as to get rid of all of the other horrific and oppressive divisions that mar our planet. The mass incarceration of Black and Latino youth, the wars and the drones and the torture the U.S. exports around the world, the super exploitation of billions in the sweatshops and the fields and the mines, and the devastation of climate change. All these outrages have a common source and a common solution. As Bob Avakian, chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party, has put it, you cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men. You can't say that you want to liberate humanity, yet keep one half of the people enslaved to the other half. The oppression of women is completely bound up with the division of society into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited, and the ending of all such conditions is impossible without the complete liberation of women. All this is why women have a tremendous role to play, not only in making revolution, but in making sure there is all-the-way revolution. The fury of women can and must be fully unleashed as a mighty force in proletarian revolution. I remember when I first heard that quote, and I knew this was a revolution and this was a leader I wanted to learn more about, and I want to encourage you to do the same. Through decades of hard work, Bob Avakian has developed a new synthesis of communism and revolution. He's drawn deep lessons from previous revolutionary struggles and taken this further on every important social question of today, including how to achieve real liberation and lasting liberation of women. And because of this, the leadership and the understanding exists to make this revolution, and that's a great advantage to the people in our struggle. But to be clear, by pointing out the need for revolution, I'm not saying we should wait
or that there's nothing we can do now. The realization that we do not have to put up with this, and that this is not necessary, should make us more impatient and more determined to stand up and struggle against this today. This is what brings me to this fight. But at the same time, I recognize and I appreciate that there are many millions of people coming from many different perspectives who can and must be part of joining together to put an end to these attacks. Everyone who is outraged should be part of this fight. We need to do this coming together from our different perspectives, as you have seen here tonight, having vigorous debate over the way forward, all while uniting more and more firmly and broadly as we stand together, shoulder to shoulder, to stop this war on women. It is vitally important that people rose up in the 60s and 70s and won the right to abortion. But ever since then, powerful forces have been working to push women back. They have gained great ground in creating moral confusion about abortion, and they have been allowed all too free a hand in claiming the moral high ground. People who once knew better have allowed themselves and have allowed women more generally to be put on the defensive. And this is something that we must change. We must get out there with the truth that forced motherhood is female enslavement, and we must demand abortion on demand and without apology. We must fight to change the way that millions of people are thinking and feeling. So I want to ask you to imagine with me one more time. Imagine the kind of movement that we can and we will build. Imagine if in the days after the destruction of Susan Cahill's clinic, if 1,000 people had traveled out to Montana and helped to clean up and rebuild, if they bought new art for her walls and gave backing and help to people locally to step forward and help her get her clinic back open. Imagine if starting tonight, everybody watching at home and everybody here in this hall, including whole congregations and organizations and student groups, as well as individuals, became part of a growing emergency response network to respond in this way to every future attack. Imagine if instead of widespread confusion among young people, who have almost never heard anyone speak positively about abortion, if instead they were learning the truth, holding teach-ins on college campuses, and taking up this fight in other ways. Imagine if all of us, again, together tonight, took responsibility for going to the campuses and distributing hundreds of thousands of fact sheets about the abortion rights emergency, waking people up and starting this transformation. Imagine if we took this fact sheet as well to the congregations and religious communities, and leaders in religious communities step forward, as those here tonight did, to speak positively about the morality of abortion and the women who make this choice. Imagine if people who have had abortion or support abortion rights were no longer afraid to say so. Imagine if we started changing this by speaking up at our jobs, with our families and our friends, even if it is controversial. And imagine even more if we did this publicly, through visible displays of resistance, and were joined by prominent people, artists and intellectuals and others who could actually give backing and plant a pole that made it easier for people to do this throughout society. And imagine all of this and more coming together with growing and determined manifestations of visible resistance, of protests and acts of courage, so that literally millions of people step forward to play their role in winning abortion on demand and in fighting for the full liberation of women. All this is not only needed, it is possible, and we have begun already by gathering tonight. We are the ones who must take responsibility for defeating this war on women. And I know, and I've heard it, and I understand people say it can be scary to step out there at first. And I remember the first time I went to an abortion clinic. When I was a teenager, it was the dead of winter, and I was scared as hell. And I was being screamed at by men with Bibles in their hands, and I was a really, really shy kid, if you can believe that. But even more than the fear, what I remember very, very deeply is that for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that really made a difference, and it really mattered to women everywhere. And I knew that right to my left and to my right, there was other people I didn't know well, but they were taking the same step and displaying the same courage. And I felt exhilarated. And so I promise you, if you step out there with us, you will not be alone. If you find the courage, that will be part of giving courage to others. You will be part of forging a community of resistance that stands up and changes the culture and re-seizes the moral high ground and inspires others, and together we have the power to win this. It is us who are standing for the lives and the futures of women, and ultimately for the interests of humanity as a whole. We should hold our heads high, speak with conviction. We should get organized and stay connected, and find the ways for everyone, whether they be big or small, public or private, with your resources, your talents, your time, and your ideas, to contribute. Everyone can do something, and together we can rise up and stop this war on women. Together we can rise up and win a whole better world. Thank you.
Tonight, we want to conclude this program with kind of a modeling of what we will be doing tomorrow in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And we want everyone together in the room tonight to read this pledge to defend abortion rights and defeat the war on women. We affirm that women are full human beings with the moral, ethical, and legal right to decide when to be mothers. We reject the view that a woman's highest purpose is to bear children, even though she does not want or cannot care for. We stand united against the escalating violence and degradation of women all over the world, and demand unfettered access to birth control and abortion services for women and girls. We refuse to be silent as these rights are diminished and obliterated through terror, stigma, fear, and shame. We are here today in the memory of all those who died and were butchered in the attempt to exercise reproductive freedom. We are here to testify and sound the alarm to the millions that need the courage to step forth with strength, purpose, and power. We are here to support the courageous providers of abortion, who will be alone if we do not defend and replenish them. And we are here to support the women everywhere who will be enslaved to enforced motherhood if we ourselves do not take the responsibility to turn this tide. Not sometime in the future, but now. We pledge resistance, to defy fear, to shatter silence, and to break down isolation. We refuse to wait for politicians or courts to make our role known. We pledge to raise our voices and fill the streets, to make art and wage protests, to defend doctors and assist women, to change hearts and enlighten minds. We pledge to call for thousands and soon millions, and to join us to stop these attacks and defeat this war. No more women denied the right to dream, the right to live, the right to love, the right to decide for themselves. We will resist.
But it is really, in a sense, the beginning of intensified struggle to defeat this war on women and everything in the pledge. We urge you to take that pledge with you, to share it with people, to read it in churches and community centers, to begin spreading this news. And tomorrow, we hope to see you at St. Patrick's Cathedral, 2 o'clock to gather, 3 o'clock, march to the cathedral. Thank you, and